really 300 campus and community-based sections, 32 affiliations, 2 million people. On behalf of all of us, we welcome you. And we just so much appreciate that you have taken time out to be with us. For those who are listening, these are some amazing people that we have here who happen to be African American, who happen to be women. Hey, there's the mayor, and she has, hi, Mayor. So we're I'm just opening up. I've just said everybody's name. And as soon as you get comfortable, I'm going to ask you, Mayor Bowser, because you're Washington and also because you're my mayor, I'm going to ask you to welcome us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry to just be joining. I was coming from
Is it okay?
another one, but I wanted to welcome you virtually to Washington, D.C. And I start off by saying that we hope that we'll get to meet in person soon. And I understand that this is the 59th National Convention, and I am just honored to join my fellow mayors and my sister mayors. And I want to thank you for hosting us tonight. We are, of course, very proud to be the NCNW headquarters home. And all of us here tonight know that we stand on the shoulders of Dorothy Height and Mary McLeod Bethune. And it is so good that we can be together in fellowship today, but also in focus on the work that we have ahead. I know that for Black women in America, yesterday was an especially difficult day. And all of us in leadership have the added responsibility to focus on what we've lost, but also to take up the mantle of change in police accountability, change in closing disparities for women, and for dealing with all of those things, especially now that we're fighting COVID. We're fighting a COVID recession, and we're dealing with a racial reckoning in our country. So we know that we have a lot of women in major American cities that are doing that work, and we do it in partnership with you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I am not going to give you the bio because if you're watching us, you're connected to the internet and you can look them up. That's my feeling about what your job is. But what I did do was I did a little research on the mayors, and I just want to take a few seconds on each one and share what their constituents think of them. I'm sure that's more important to them. And it also gives us a greater understanding of what they are up against. So I have just a sentence or two about each one based on my research of what constituents in the media in their cities have to say about them. I'm going to start with Mayor Bottoms. In August of this year, you and Invest Atlanta announced an extension of your own Atlanta vision that establishes objectives to achieve better economic outcomes for Atlanta, primarily Black and Brown communities where low household income and high rates of poverty and unemployment persist. But what happened when you set that up? And when it was announced, the president of Invest and many, many others commended you for your leadership and the fact that you are concentrating on making sure that the city's economic development strategy is rooted in economic mobility principles that work for all Atlantans. Mayor Breed, according to the LA Times, since early March, you garnered national attention both for being out front of the pandemic and playing the role of a reassuring, sometimes scolding civic leader who knows what the future will bring with regard to COVID-19, said an assemblyman. But London is focused on the immediate task at hand. I know she made decisions where there were risks of being seen as overreacting, and she was comfortable with those risks. Mayor Lightfoot, there's a lot of stuff that's great about you, but here's one of the observations. It said, it looks like Mayor Lori Lightfoot has the political wind at her back as she seeks to deliver a police contract that makes it easier to investigate and discipline wayward officers and convince the Illinois General Assembly to require police officers to be licensed. A new survey showed that in your first year, Mayor, with your highest job approval rating yet at 78%, this was according to the Chicago Sun-Times, in case you didn't see it. Mayor Bowser, according to the Washington Post in November 2019, 2/3 of the DC residents approve of your job performance. Your popularity is buoyed by increasingly positive grades regarding public schools and a steady satisfaction with the general direction of the city. In more recent, you've become a star with regard to the Black Lives Matter Plaza, which others have said healing and improving starts with acknowledging. This is first-class leadership move by Mayor Bowser. So we are just so honored to have you, and it's going to be a little different interview. You get interviewed enough. This is really to get at who you are, who you think you are, what you're doing, what you think you're doing, and what kind of advice you can give the rest of the world. And maybe 3 to 4 minutes on each question, and we'll do a round. I'll ask the first question, and then we'll do a round, and then go to the next one. We can start with Mayor Bottoms, but we can change the order if you want. And all you have to do is just signal to me, and I'll alter the way I'm going about it. Just take a week, Mayor Bottoms, in any week as an example, as mayor, and share with us that week, your activities, what kind of homework you had to do, who did you have to involve in the preparation, what were your surprises, what were your satisfactions, what were your disappointments, and how did you feel about that week? And it's any week, because I'm sure all of the weeks have a mixture of surprises and satisfactions and disappointments, but please share with us.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to join my sister mayors and to all who are watching. And before the pandemic, when life was normal as we knew it, I'd often said my days were in 3 shifts. My first shift was trying to get my kids out the door. Second shift was being mayor. And then third shift was when I had to come home and deal with the other side of my kids. And now it's just all one long shift. But I think that's, for me anyway, this is what the past few years have been like. And I often lamented that I was dealt such an unfair hand in terms of the beginning of my tenure as mayor, because we were hit with a cyber attack, which was the worst in municipal history, right up until I watched Lori and I watched London come in, and I thought my transition wasn't that bad at all. So I'm going to stop complaining. But there is no typical week. And I was just talking with a male colleague of ours yesterday, and just, we often we can let our hair down with each other and really get things off of our chest. And I asked, what was it like to be a mayor before this president was in office. And by all accounts, it was completely different. And I share that because there is no typical week. So for all of the things that we have to deal with, we're confronted with in our cities, you know, before the pandemic, it could be any number of things related to the trash is not being picked up on time, the roads need to be paved, we've got a crime spike, those day-to-day things that cities deal with. How do we balance our budget? How do we get enough money to make sure that our kids are able to attend the summer program this summer? These very important things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and couple that with the business community. But by all accounts, this president has made even the most difficult of circumstances that much more difficult, because you don't know what you're going to get coming out of Washington, quite frankly. So the past few months, you know, my day can go anywhere from this morning. It was kicking off with our Metro Chamber to just a couple of days ago, announcing something with our superintendent, to dealing with protests late into the night last night. Every day is a different day, but that's what being a mayor is all about, being able to take on those challenges and being able to respond very quickly. But on top of that, being able to now take things onto our plate that, quite frankly, we shouldn't have to be confronted with, including a pandemic response. So there is no typical day, because this is not a typical America right now.
Thank you. And we are pleased that you are out and around. I think we're all very concerned about you and your family. So it's good to have you in better shape. We know it's not perfect. Mayor Breed.
Yeah, I really have to appreciate what Keisha said as it relates to it not being a typical day. And I can't help but, as I look at these incredible women, think that, you know, at a historic time where you have more African-American women serving as mayor than any other time, dealing with some of the most unprecedented times in our country's history, I can't help but think that, you know, we were created for times such as these. Because when you think about how, you know, challenging this has been and how frustrating it's been, I mean, none of us thought we'd ever experienced a world pandemic. You know, the racial uprising like never before. As Black people, we've lived in it, and now we're seeing something we've never seen before. I mean, in San Francisco, just a couple of weeks ago, the sky was orange, red, and it was like we were living in dark days. It's almost biblical. And what happens, and what I've noticed, and what I appreciate more than anything else, is that, you know, first of all, I'm not alone. And I have seen, you know, these women give incredible speeches, encouraging and pushing back, and trying to keep the calm, and really stepping up like never before, as only a Black woman can. Because when you think about what is happening in our country and the challenges that we're all experiencing, you know, basically when I remember when Keisha got out there and the protests and everything that was happening, I was basically in tears when she talked about being a mother, when she talked about this is the home of the civil rights movement and Dr. King, like we are better than this. And the fact is there are some real challenges in this country. And I think that, you know, for us, days are not typical. Decisions have to get made. People are counting on us. And so, you know, yes, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to take care of our families, but we also have to make very important decisions that impact people's lives on a regular basis. And there is no guidebook. There is no typical day. There is no, you know, regular schedule. There is just us in existence, and really depending on our faith and our supporters and our families to help lift us up as we deal with these challenging times, so that we can assure the public that, you know, things are going to be okay, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to be stronger after we have the tough conversations. We're going to be stronger, you know, after we go through what is a very, very tough time for all of us. And so You know, it's our life, but it's not as if we haven't had these experiences. You know, it like, for example, and I know we want to cut this short, but when you think about it, I just think about how I grew up in public housing, the violence, the racism, all the stuff that I've lived through. And so now all of a sudden, people who are not African American, they're outraged, right? They're living through what we've lived through. So our ability to have, you know, our experiences, our relationships, and how we have existed in this country our entire lives, and to use that in these roles at this time, I think is really incredible. And it's why, you know, we're able to go from day to day to day and make good decisions and continue to be strong leaders for our cities, which sets an example for the rest of the country to follow.
Thank you. Mayor Lightfoot.
Take myself off mute. You know, I'm just listening to the words of Keisha and London, and I think they've really summed up a lot of what I feel. I think that when the history books are written about 2020, there are going to be multiple chapters talking about the year of the mayors. And I think in particular, the year of the Black women mayors. We have been faced with crisis after crisis after crisis. And London just said it feels like biblical times. Well, I look out my window every day and wait for the frogs to fall or the locusts to come. Because I got to tell you, we've been through it all. Just to give you an example of a single day in my life recently. I woke up early on the morning of August 10th, which is a Monday morning, to looting in my city. And it just rocked our world because we thought we got to a pretty good place, and we were hit, we were vulnerable, shattered people's confidence. So dealing with that at the first part of my day, and then in the afternoon, what was started out to be a beautiful sunny day, we were hit with a term that I didn't know before called a derecho. So that's a fierce series of windstorms that blew through our city, knocked out electrical power to literally thousands, trees down in the street, electrical lines severed, people without power. So at the same time that we were dealing with the aftermath of this another set of looting, we had this horrible storm that put people on their backs and on their knees. So we had to manage all of that at the same time, in addition to the day-to-day. So where I have drawn on strength is from the women that are here on this presentation with me. I lean into my faith for sure, but I've also leaned into the experience and the wisdom and just the sisterhood of these women who have carried me through some very, very difficult times. I'm the youngest mayor in terms of, I think I'm the oldest in terms of age, but I'm the youngest in terms of term of mayor. And all of these women have performed under difficult circumstances and really risen to meet the challenge of our time. I watch them with great admiration, and they know this. I steal from them anything that makes sense for Chicago. But this has been an unbelievable experience, but in many ways an amazing experience. And I'll pick up on the point that I think London also made, which is our challenge, but our responsibility in these difficult times is to lead with integrity, to lead with transparency, and inspire hope. You know, we're Black women, and many of us grew up in very difficult circumstances, and we learned from an early age that as Black women, the cavalry wasn't coming to save us. Whatever we were going to get on our own through our determination, through people who put an arm around us and helped us. And that's the way we are leading in our cities. We're not waiting for somebody else to save us. We know we got to do it for ourselves, and we got to do it for the residents of our cities.
Thank you. Mayor Bowser? Mute.
Can Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
Okay,
you.
perfect. I had to switch from my other device, but I would just echo what the mayors have said. So from Lori's terminology, I'm the old mayor. And it's kind of hard to believe in a lot of ways. But when I was elected, I was trying to think about this earlier. I think it was me and Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who were Black women mayors. And within a year or two, there was just this wonderful class of women who were elected to be mayors of major cities. It was so many, in fact. I called them up and got them together. And when we were all in Washington, had Essence come out and do this beautiful photo shoot of us. And that's how, just what a remarkable year it was. I think London and Keisha were elected. And Lori, I don't think you had been elected yet, but it was just a wonderful camaraderie. And what we all know is that we want our cities to succeed, our people to succeed, and each other to succeed. Because I am London, I am Lori, and I am Keisha. And so they've got to do great, I do great. When I do great, they do great. We are judged together. And we know how tough it is for America to accept female executives. And so we have to remember that and always support each other and protect each other. And what I have been so heartened by in the nomination of Kamala Harris is that people are standing up and protecting her and recognizing that they have to do that. And so we need to take that lesson, and because this is the group of people that are going to break the glass ceiling to get us a woman for president. And so we have to take the lessons that we see in female executive leadership. The mayor's office is where that training can happen.
Thank you. Mayor Bottoms, if I were to ask you what concerns you most as mayor, is it public safety? Is it infrastructure, social services, budget? What is it? And then why would you say that would be your highest priority?
Public safety is at the top of my list, and that's for personal reasons and for my position as mayor. My 18-year-old nephew was murdered a few years ago, and it was a case of mistaken identity. He was a college student hanging out with some friends at their apartment. My father-in-law had just bought him a new car. Car was under a lamp post. It appeared to be one color. And these gang members thought that it was somebody else's car and shot up the car, and he was killed. And so our family experienced the worst that could possibly happen. And when the police went out, what the seniors in the community told my brother-in-law was that there was an ongoing gang war. And that they shoot it out all of the time in this community. And ironically, it's, not very far from the Atlanta University Center, not far from where my mom owned the hair salon for many years. And so I share all that with you because even at that time, I was a council member, and my being a council member didn't protect my nephew. And in the same way, it doesn't protect my children when they walk out the door. And so public safety is always top of mind. Even when our crime numbers are low, what I know is that if somebody's been murdered, low crime numbers don't mean anything to that family member that's experienced that pain. And it's especially challenging, of course, over the past few months because we're trying to balance. So what I know, when my nephew was murdered, we called the police, and I looked to the police for answers, and the police solved his murder and the young men, and it's just a tragedy all the way around. But these young men are now in prison, and ironically, one of the young men went to middle school with my nephew, but he didn't even know that's whose car he was shooting up. And so under the best of times statistically, there are people still dying, and over the past few months, it's now balancing how do we keep our community safe? How do we show our police officers that we respect them and support them, but also hold them accountable, and having that mutual respect with our communities. And so for that reason and so many more, public safety will always be at the top of my list.
Yeah, Mayor Lightfoot, what would you say for your city?
Well, really, it's kind of all of the above.
Okay.
Because you can't have public safety if people are poor and hurting. You can't have quality health care without making sure that you're connecting people up to a whole array of services. So to me, when I think about building healthy, strong communities, there's so many different component parts because there's so much of it that's interconnected. And really, that point, I think, has really been underscored and brought home as we're fighting this horrible pandemic of COVID-19. The things that we need as tools to reach our people, particularly people of color, and particularly Black folks, all of the things that we need to be able to respond to this crisis and lift people up and out of harm's way depends upon the entirety of the ecosystem being strong. Of course, public safety in some ways is top of mind, as Keisha, I think, so eloquently said, because if people literally do not feel safe, it's hard for them to think that anything else matters. If they don't feel safe, they leave. They vote with their feet by leaving your city. But there's so many things that roll up into the whole notion of public safety and what keeps people safe. And a lot of it has to do with the other issues that you outlined as well.
Yeah.
So for us, we're working on multiple layers and multiple tracks at the same time always. And we don't have the luxury to just focus on one thing because everything is so important.
Mayor Bowser?
Yes. Right now, just all of what my colleagues have said, I agree with. And right now, what's keeping me up and what I think is about what that is most important is how we get kids back in school, Connie. And this pandemic, one of the most difficult decisions for me has been keeping kids out of school, trying to keep our communities healthy and finding a way back. So right now I'm 100% occupied with keeping the virus contained in our city, a slow, safe reopening, but one that prioritizes getting kids back in school. And what concerns me about that is we have 100,000 kids in our system right now who don't have contact with an adult at school, their school nurse, any issues that they may have at home or could be exacerbated by not having that contact, nutritious meals, exercise, mental health, you name it. They're not getting it at home. And the learning loss that they are experiencing is tremendous. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots during this period is only going to widen. So I recognize all of the complexities that we're dealing with. We have to take care of our workforce and be ready for our workforce, take care of our buildings. But we as a community, workers, community members, parents, have to prioritize getting kids back in an in-person environment.
Thank you. Mayor Breed?
I just, I think the biggest challenge that we face is systemic racism, because it plays a role in how all of this happens in the first place. In San Francisco, you would think with a less than 6% African-American population that African-Americans would be doing well here. In fact, disproportionately, when you look at almost 50% of the homeless population, almost 50% of those who are pulled over and those who serve in our criminal justice system, almost 50% of those who are dropping out of high school. When we look at the achievement gap, even in our public school system right now, as private schools are going to start reopening and public schools aren't, we see that achievement gap widening. from just this past spring with African-American students, even when we provide them with devices and high-speed internet, there is a real challenge that we face as a country, because I think this whole racial, what I would call reckoning that is occurring, on the one hand, it is necessary to call attention to it. But what I also find, unfortunately, are the same people who are trying to call attention to it, the mostly non-African Americans, on the one hand, are shining a light on it. But then on the other hand, they have a problem when we are trying to deliver and do specifically for the African American community. And they want to be the ones to tell Black mayors in particular what we should do for people in the African American community. And I think that, and what I've tried to, impress upon my team and the folks who work for me, that everything that we do has to be looked at from an equity lens. And then secondly, everything that we do may not work for the African American community the same that it works for other communities. So we have to start getting creative. I didn't just take $120 million from the police department and divert it to the African American community just to start handing out money. The goal was to make that money work in places, in ways that it has not worked for the African American community in this city before, and to make a statement as a result of it. So I think that when we look at a place like San Francisco, you think there's a lot of wealthy people here, it's a beautiful city, it's a liberal city, but we should be embarrassed really by what has happened to African Americans in this city. So when I'm making those kinds of investments and I'm getting criticized for it, I don't really care, because we can't keep talking about wanting to see a change and wanting to improve our cities unless we make sure that when those communities are disproportionately impacted in some of the challenges that exist in our city, when we're not investing in them, when we're not changing policies and providing resources, and we're trying to use all these different laws around equal protection and equal access and so on and so forth, that's bullshit. Because
that's a technical term, everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even, but it is.
No, it's good.
Is. So don't say Black Lives Matter and hold up your signs and hang up all your signs. And then when I create a $3.5 million no interest loan fund for Black businesses, you got a problem with that. You got a problem with, me diverting resources to the Black community. So that's really where we are, I think. And I think this is why this is important, because Black people disproportionately, Black men disproportionately are dying at the hands of law enforcement. Black men are dying from gun violence. Black men are in our prison systems and are dropping out of our high schools and are the large part of our homeless population. So we can't keep talking about equity and equal access and not be deliberate about those changes and those investments.
I'm going to ask you the next question because it links to something that you said. National Council of Negro Women feels as one of our responsibilities to bring on the next generation of leaders. And one thing that we can do is share what we know, what our experience is. They may not do things the way we've done it. They may see it different. The world is going to be different, but we try to work with the next generation. And so a question that I have that links to something you said was, how do you confront, how do you deal with things in your life that are just totally unfair, inexcusable? You mentioned racism, which made me come back to you. Yeah. How do you deal with it, and how do you keep sane in dealing with it?
Well, first of all, my grandmother raised me, so I just want to apologize for using profanity in my remarks. My grandmother raised me right, so I'm sorry. Second of all, what I had to realize a long time ago is I can only control what I do, and I can't control what other people do. And part of what I hope I'm able to do in my capacity as mayor, and just as my capacity as a citizen on this earth, is to be an example, a mentor, a friend, and a leader that tries to put out the kind of, energy and positivity and uplifting that is necessary for others to take a hold of, so that we can all do our part in that realm. Because, people who are racist, they don't become racist, as children. We know what would happen if we took kids of all ages and they grew up together and they didn't hear the talk of their parents making certain comments about, different races and making comments about people. We know that they would grow up loving each other, having each other's back, and it would be a completely different world. And so the best that we can do is, of course, hold people accountable, be in these positions to make real change, and not be afraid of it. Not be afraid of the fact that we don't have a large constituency of Black voters in San Francisco, but we're still going to make those hard decisions about supporting this particular community, making sure that the people around us and the people who are in our city departments and in law enforcement, that we're weeding out those folks, who naturally are just racist and have certain biases towards certain groups, towards people who are a part of our LGBT community, our Latino community, our Chinese community. We don't need the divisiveness, but we can't control a situation that involves someone who has those kinds of feelings. And I think the more of us that speak up, the more of us that are in these leadership positions, the more of us that are doing our part to make real change with our aggressive policies, I think that's what's going to help make a difference. I mean, I started a program called Trans Home SF, and it was because not just disproportionately the trans community is impacted by homelessness more than anyone else. Again, African-American trans women are impacted in a significantly large number than everyone else. And so these disparities continue to exist. The blowback and the negativity and the name calling and some of the things that people said about that, you think I didn't care, because I can't control what they say and what they do. But I'm still going to take those risks and do what's right by the people of this city. And I think that, that's what's important, because it's a tough world. And this is San Francisco. So just imagine what's going on in, the South and Atlanta and other places, and what especially these mayors are dealing with.
Right.
And I'm dealing with it in one of the most liberal cities in the world. So we just have to make sure we're doing our part and doing everything we can to support and uplift one another, and making sure that we are working to bring up the next generation in a way that they can ultimately get to a point where they have a better world than what we are living in right now.
Thank you. Mayor Bottoms, how do you deal with what confronts you in life that is totally unfair, inexcusably unfair, plain old everyday unfair? What do you do? How do you deal with it? And still accomplish all the kinds of things that you accomplish?
For me, it's making a determination between when someone is just simply ignorant or when they are just being malicious. And I deal with it two very differently, especially over the past few months. I think as we have this conversation about racial awakenings and reckonings in this country, we've got to give people the grace to be able to articulate their ignorance. And then it's our responsibility, I believe, to educate them and bring them along. But when someone is malicious, I deal with that very differently. And I'll give you an example. He's a very prominent businessman in Atlanta who was coming into my office for a meeting. And I knew that he had said to several people that a contractor had paid for my second home on Martha's Vineyard. And so, the easy and simple thing would have been to act as if I'd never heard this rumor before. But when he came into my office, I said to him, I said, do you understand how racist that is? I said, aside from the fact that you are spreading a rumor that is not true, I said, you are stereotyping me and my family. And you were saying that we can't get up and go to work every day and earn some money and then be able to afford a second home. I said, and on top of that, it is disgraceful that you, for somebody like me who is not very far removed from slavery, 5 generations removed, I said, do you understand the pride that we have in home ownership? And then to be able to own another home, do you understand what that feels like as an African American in this country? I said, and you are diminishing all of that when you speak as if we didn't earn it, that someone had to give it to us. So I give that very long story to say that was malicious, and it was necessary to confront that directly, and not just to confront him on a rumor, but to point out to him he probably didn't even recognize the racism in the underlying racism in spreading that rumor. So, but it was necessary to confront it. But just yesterday, you talk about a typical day. My day went from reviewing some body cam footage from a police involved shooting, a fatal shooting, to speaking with some local Wells Fargo people, just on the heels of the CEO saying that it was difficult to find diversity. And I haven't heard the entirety of his comments, but what I heard in what I read was simply ignorance. That this was someone who was attempting to articulate that they wanted to do better, needed to do better, but really believed that he couldn't find talented people to fill some of these senior level jobs. So in my conversation with the employees of Wells Fargo, what I said is, in the spirit of Maynard Jackson, who changed diversity and participation across this country, that Maynard Jackson was very intentional about that. If you were going to do business with the city of Atlanta, if we were going to put our money into your banks, you were going to have to reflect a board that you were going to have a board that reflected diversity and senior leadership. So Wells Fargo is a wonderful partner to the city of Atlanta. So I will be a wonderful partner in turn and have a direct conversation with that CEO on where he can in fact go and find good talent if he's had a difficult problem finding diverse talent. But I think that's someone who needs to be educated. I don't think that's someone who's attempting, who's being malicious.
Thank you. Mayor Bowser.
As I was listening to the mayor's, Connie, I was just thinking of how I see the race conversation happening in DC. Now, we live in a city that was renowned as the chocolate city.
Right.
And over the course, let's call it 15 years, we've seen that dramatically change. I was born in a Washington where it was 77% Black, 77% African American, and now we're probably like 47% African American and changing. So I think that the race discussion, even in the course of my public service, has just changed dramatically. We have always had white neighbors in DC, but I think what they want for DC has changed. And there was more of a collaboration. So more wealthy people and people who have what we say in DC who live west of the park wanted to invest in east of the river. And so I don't even have to explain what that means to people who aren't from DC. But that, I think, has sort of changed. And when we talk about educating neighbors, and what London was saying, I really resonated with me, is because we want to work with our white, liberal, and progressive friends, but we don't want them to impose and tell the Black mayor that the Black mayor doesn't care about Black people and they know best. And so that is like a real tough race conversation that I think that is not, that it's kind of clouded in DC. People don't talk about it candidly, but that is what's happening here. And so we start off in a good place in that we are a prosperous city. We start off in a good place that we're a talented city. And so we have what it takes to kind of deal with those issues if we can talk candidly to each other. And that's where we're lacking, quite frankly, Connie, that we don't have those candid conversations about race, where people who are like me, where it's become in vogue in progressive communities to say about somebody like me that I'm old guard. Can you imagine that? I'm old guard. So I'm Black, I'm born here, I'm in my 40s. I'm a Democrat. I'm old guard.
Yeah.
They're the new progressives, so therefore they're smarter and they're not corrupt. Here's the other thing, like Keisha was talking about. People will toss around calling a Black politician corrupt, like they were saying nothing, and I would have the exact same reaction that Mayor Bottoms had. And so I just think part of the race discussion here in DC is get people who are fairly like-minded, like the progressives, and we want the same things for people. We want people to have a fair shot in this town, and we just go about it, and the tactics and the language that we use are very different. So I feel like I feel more energized to deal with that. Coming on the other side of COVID, where the discussion of race and equitable investments is so front and center and so obvious. The negative impacts of ignoring those issues are in our community. COVID has just shown a light on it. So I think we have some tough discussions ahead, but we're in a good position to have them now.
Thank you. Mayor Lightfoot.
So the nice ladies went before me.
Okay.
I just don't put up with a lot of nonsense. I've been through too many things in my life. I'm too old, too tired half the time. I'm just not having it. And look, the reality is racism isn't disappeared, sexism isn't disappeared, homophobia hasn't disappeared. And I have to put up with a lot of people from both sides trying to tear at me, make me into a two-dimensional cardboard figure. But luckily, my parents raised me well. I'm very tough and strong. And I have a very good sense of who I am and what my values are. So when I hear from some folks on the left that I'm not progressive enough or that I'm not Black enough, or I hear from folks on the right that I'm a this, that, and the other because I'm not a white man and how dare I have this role, I know I'm right where I need to be. I stay forward, I stay focused, I lean into my faith, and I don't let people tear me down. I've had the naysayers my whole life. You know, I grew up poor with two parents that grew up in the segregated South, barely had 2 nickels to rub together, struggled my entire growing up years. Everything that I've gotten, I've earned the hard way. Nobody gave me anything. So I don't owe anybody anything. I'm not part of the Democratic machine in Chicago. I beat the machine. 75% of the vote, won in every ward. And that has freed me up not to worry about being beholden to anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't try to build bridges. I do. But I build them from a position of knowing that I will succeed and I will rise and I will fall based upon my sweat, my determination, my grit, and the people who truly understand the way in which we're trying to transform the city by expanding our notion of equity and inclusion and not just focusing on the rich or the clouded. You know, Chicago has a long history of machine politics. I'm not anybody that somebody sent. And if you know the saying in Chicago, you'll know how that resonates. I'm me. I'm always going to be me. I'm going to try to do the best that I can, I'm a God-fearing woman. As I said, I lean into my faith. I pray every day for strength. I pray every day for humility. But I'm going to stay focused and determined to get the job done that the Lord and the voters sent me to do. And I'm not going to let anything or anybody hold me back. Now, I'm only the second Black mayor in this city's long history. The first being Harold Washington. Harold Washington spent his whole first term fighting a bunch of racist dogs who tried to deny him his true place as mayor. He won a second term, but he didn't get to enjoy it because he died very early on into his second term. So all the dreams that he had, and I know he had to have been very mindful of the transformative things that Maynard Jackson had done in Atlanta, and I've heard those stories over and over again. It's taken almost 30 years for us to get back into power in the city because we tore each other apart. Black folks tore each other apart. I've seen some of that here in my city. So it's not just the racism from others, it's the racism from us. And a lot of it is Black men, I'm just gonna say it, who are misogynist and are pissed off that a woman is in charge. But that's all right. God has a plan for all of us.
Right. Thank you. Now, before I go to the final question, which is about leadership and telling the next generation, giving them what kind of advice you would, whether or not they had to get into the kind of business that you're in. I want to know, you know who's listening? You know, it's all ages. It's primarily Black women, although we have many Black men who are part of the National Council of Negro Women. It's people who are fairly activists in their communities, people who work as teams, and people who have long-term ties to churches and to this organization and similar organizations. What do you think what else should be shared with them before the final discussion for the young people, should they go into leading through politics or through other arenas? What else would you have thought we should have touched on? And do you have questions or comments of one another? I know you talk, I can tell it, people are full of baloney. I use baloney. People are full of baloney. They say, oh, we get together all the time. We help one another. And that's a bunch of hooey. But I can tell this is genuine. So you're not exploring each other for the first time here today, but it would be helpful if you had any question or anything you thought of that you wanted to bring out from one another that we haven't really touched on with the questions or the outgoing question about leadership.
Well, can I just say something about my sister mayors here that I've just been in awe of over the last 6 months. And I know that London was at the forefront of recognizing what the coronavirus would do to a city. And she made some very, very bold moves early on, and we need to appreciate her for that and tell her, make sure she shakes us and says, this is what I'm about to do, you should do it too. And our sister Mayor Keisha was just at the forefront of a vice presidential conversation, which I think is remarkable for mayors and definitely remarkable for Black women. And we've been so proud of her. And Lori is fighting a fight like we are against Donald Trump, trying to move into cities and take over cities. And it's a strong and forceful fight that if you recognize when Donald Trump gets punched in the face, he steps back. And we just always have to remember those things. So you called out at the beginning, Connie, just some remarkable things that people are saying about these women. So I wanted to add a couple.
Thank you. Any other observations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Muriel mentioned the convening she had, and it seems like a lifetime ago, but that was such a special moment for all of us. And it really set the stage for what we should expect from one another as Black women. You know, there are these stereotypes that follow us, unfortunately, but in that convening, it was, the power in that room was palatable. And it was the most beautiful portrait of Black women across this country, many of whom we are seeing every day on the news leading their cities. So I just want to thank you again for that, Muriel, because that's something that I carry very deeply in my heart. And we check on each other and lift each other up more times than I can count. And as Lori was speaking about Harold Washington, I remember my grandmother's house in Chicago. You remember when you used to have John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King on the picture in the living room over the sofa with the plastic? Well, in my grandmother's house, there was a picture of Harold Washington. And as I was watching Lori speak, I just wonder how many people in Chicago have your picture hanging up in their homes now, because that's how extraordinary. In London, I mean, for Muriel and I had the privilege of following a long line of African-American mayors, but what Lori and what London have done in their cities is absolutely remarkable. And I say all of that to say just the last piece of nugget I will leave is for those who think that you can't be a part of leadership. This is, we are you. We are your communities. And leadership comes in different forms and different faces, but it's about us bringing our authentic selves to the table and representing our communities. And I would just suggest to all who are attempting to work within their respective communities, get to know and understand who your leaders are. It doesn't mean that it has to be on a personal basis, but what I share with people all the time, the quickest way to get me not to do something is to come yelling and screaming at me. Have a respectful conversation with me. And whatever the style is of your mayor, get to know that mayor, even if from afar, so that you can be effective. Because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our communities. We may not agree how to get there, but I truly believe that we all want what's best.
So any other close? Yeah, Mayor Breed.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, it's such a blessing to be in a situation like this. And this is not something I ever thought, you know, coming from where I came from, living the kind of experience in public housing, being raised by my grandmother and dealing, you know, with the violence and the drama. Like I couldn't even believe that I had an opportunity to go to college, let alone become mayor of, you know, the city that I was born and raised in. And so this has been a real blessing. And I think what's made this experience definitely so rewarding is when I was elected, you know, really the network of African-American women mayor. Muriel was like one of the first people to kind of reach out, and it was like, whatever you need and embrace. And, you know, I want to make sure we connect and have the conversation, because I think that, you know, like there's this different kind of kinship that comes with that because of all our unique experiences. There are things that we say to each other and things that we don't even have to say to each other because of what we know that we are experiencing in these roles. And so that's why I think when we get together and we have these conversations and we're hearing from one another, we're like shaking our heads and we're like, yes. And I, Lori said she steals from us. I steal from you too. I see what these mayors are doing. Muriel put that Black Lives Matter and everybody was like,
Oh yeah.
Like they were on me. They were like, Mayor, you got to put this down. And I was just like, dang, she got to it first. I'm like, we're still in that. So I watch these women, they lead and they lead with their hearts, and they care, and it just feels so good to see, them out there doing this incredible work and being on the front lines. So we learn from one another, we support one another, and it's really a blessing to be in a position at this time. It may seem challenging, and in the absence of federal leadership in the way that we really deserve in a country like the United States of America, especially in 2020, I think it's made us stronger, and it's made us, it created a closer bond. Because as Lori said, you're gonna look back on 2020, it really is gonna be like, the year of the Black woman, and how, we have really led in this country to protect and to save lives and to uplift our communities like never before. I think that's what's going to happen. And so I'm grateful to all of you, and it's great being on a panel with you and listening to you and talking about our experiences, and also privately being able to vent with one another. And get it all off our chest and still go out there and deliver the kind of speeches and the kind of reassurance that people are counting on from us. And, it just clearly is naturally who we are as people. And I think it's what's made, although a challenging time in this pandemic, it's made for a better response from all of us. So glad to be a part of this group and grateful to all of you. And thank you so much for letting me participate, and then always answering my calls and my text messages.
Thanks,
Well,
Mayor.
yeah, this has been wonderful. So, the organization is called the National Council of Negro Women. It could be Black women, it could be African American, but we all know what that means. But what it does mean, and why this was so important, and you're sharing the way that you shared, is we're serious about having your back. And you should just know that. And it's a whole bunch of us. And we're in a lot of places, and you don't even know where we are. Mm-hmm. But the sharing today of you is also going to help us, both the older people like me and the medium and the young people. It's going to help us all think of ways that we can be supportive of you, because you care about us. That's the message in everything that you said, that you're in those positions to serve others. People don't assume that of all people who are in a position that you hold. So we're just so proud to know you. We take credit for what you do. Mayor, my mayor, I acted like I was the one that painted that sign. And I put it up there, and I did. And I'm ready to take anybody on, got anything bad to say about it. So it's wonderful. If you got any closing remarks, but this has been a very inspiring exchange, in large part because you are who you are. As I said at the outset, we can read a whole bunch of stuff. You're all Google and a whole bunch of stuff comes out, but it is who are you inside that we were able to see today. And so thank you for that.
Thank you, Connie, for a wonderful job. Thank you, mayors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Over and out.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
One shout out to Ingrid Saunders-Jones. Thank you very much. And Janetta Cole, both Atlanta women. So I appreciate their leadership and all that they continue to do for us.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And thank you so much. And good luck to all of you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Love you all.
Yeah.